Hi, my name is Claire Gabriel Tandayulahade, and I will talk about 24-hour food recall in a journal article review. But before that, I have to briefly explain first about what 24-hour food recall is. So, according to Gibson, 24-hour food recall is a dietary recall method that uses interview to assess the actual food and nutritional value intake of individuals from the preceding day. It only requires a form and portion size estimation tools and can be repeated to measure general food intake. What has to be taken into account by the interviewer when using this method is the steps that has been curated. First, the interviewer must quickly list or recall all the food that has been consumed by the respondent in the preceding day from morning to night. And then the interviewer must ask about the forgotten foods or the categories of foods that may have been forgotten by the respondent. After that, the interviewer has to ask about the time and occasion where the meals are being eaten by the respondent. And then the interviewer must ask about the details and the amounts of food being consumed by the respondent on the preceding day. And finally, the final probe is detailing everything and recalling things that may have been forgotten. The 24-hour food recall method is being used in so many different occasions, one of it being in research. One of the research is an article titled Animal and Plant Protein Food Sources in Indonesia Differ Across Socio-Demographic Groups, Sociocultural Research in Protein Transition in Indonesia and Malaysia by Kusen et al. In 2022, where this method is used as a way to examine protein intake by the subjects of the research. So this research is to examine the diversity of protein food sources in both animal and plant across diverse socio-demographic groups in Indonesia compared to Malaysia. So the design is where the script or socio-cultural research and protein transition study was based on population-based samples recorded in Indonesia and in Malaysia, where data from 24-hour in-person dietary recalls in each country were used to construct the frequency counts of protein sources by food groups. Protein sources were defined as fish, poultry, red meat, eggs, dairy, and plants. The percent reported frequencies for animal and plant proteins were compared across socio-demographic strata and by country. And the result shows that animal protein frequency counts were 34% of total in Indonesia and 50% in Malaysia. Higher reported consumption frequencies for poultry and red meat in both countries were associated with urban living, greater modernization, and higher socioeconomic status, with stronger social gradients observed in Indonesia. Reported fish consumption was higher in Indonesia than in Malaysia, whereas fish was more likely to be listed by rural island populations in Indonesia and was associated with lower education and incomes. Consumption frequencies for plant-based proteins were associated with lower socioeconomic status both in Indonesia and in Malaysia. In conclusion, more affluent groups in both countries reported higher frequencies for meat, eggs, and dairy as opposed to fish. Greater economic development in Southeast Asia is associated with more animal protein, particularly from poultry, which may displace fish, the traditional source of high-quality protein in the region. So based on the review in this article, the 24-hour dietary recall or the 24-hour food recall was the main tool to capture what participants in Indonesia and Malaysia ate in the preceding day. Instead of measuring exact nutrient amounts, the study used these recalls to create frequency counts or how often each protein source appeared in the diet. This gave a proxy for protein diversity and quality rather than intake volume. The frequency counts were then compared across socio-demographic variables to reveal patterns in protein consumption in both countries. This research shows that this method can be used in various situations and not just assessing daily nutritional intake, even though this recall is mainly used for that objective. Like any other methods, this method also has some advantages and disadvantages. Some of the advantages are almost unlimited level of specificity for the foods consumed, which is very important in researches, and assessing daily nutritional intake values. And the other advantages are such as respondent burden is relatively low since literacy level is not very much needed, and the procedure does not alter food intake patterns, and is very sensitive to ethnic differences, which is very, very important for researchers like the one we just reviewed. There are also some disadvantages for this method, such as depending on respondents' ability to recall intake accurately, which can be prevented by using proxies for respondents that has low ability to recall intake, and possibility of recall bias, where the individual may selectively recall food items to appear better in front of the interviewers, that can be prevented by not judging the respondent when doing the interviews. And the other disadvantages being high interviewer burden and can be resource intensive, time consuming, and labor intensive if not done very well. And just like any other methods, these methods can also be biased, but these biases can be prevented, such as random errors that can be prevented by incorporating standardized quality control procedures, such as collecting more than 24-hour recall per person, with the number depending on the study objectives, since background factors can markedly influence the magnitude of within-person variability in food and nutrient intakes. Some potential sources of systematic errors, such as day of the week, season, region, and rural or urban location, age, and sex respondents can be taken into account by carefully designing the initial 24-hour recall protocol and accounting for them in the data analysis. Respondent bias can be minimized by using a multiple pass recall and standardized probes for descriptive details for each food and beverage. Interview biases may occur when responding differentially to unusual food practices, which can be minimized by avoiding value judgments. In conclusion, 24 hours food recall is a commonly used dietary recall to assess an individual's actual food and nutritional intake through interview and listing. This method can be used to assess general intake too through repeated measures and across a group of individuals through personal interviews across the group of people. One of the examples of the usage, other than to assess nutritional intake, of this method can be reviewed through an article of a research titled Animal and Plant Protein Food Sources in Indonesia Differ Across Socio-Demographic Groups, Socio-Cultural Research in Protein Transition in Indonesia and Malaysia by Kusun et al. In 2022, where this method was used as a way to examine protein intake of the subject of the research and its frequency instead of the nutritional value. So instead of measuring exact nutrient amounts, the study used these recalls to create frequency counts of how often each protein source appeared in the diet, even though this recall is mainly used to assess daily nutritional intake, which shows the diversity of how this method can be used. So 24 hours food recall itself is a method that may have some advantages and disadvantages that can be minimized and biases that can be prevented. Therefore, 24 hours food recall is recommended to be used as dietary recall method in researches and other situations. Thank you.